This episode is sponsored by the Real Estate Foundation of BC. REF BC is a philanthropic organization that supports sustainable, equitable, and socially just relationships with land and water. Learn more about the Foundation's grants and initiatives at refbc.com.
My name is Shayla Raine. I am 23 years old. I'm from Maskwacis, Alberta, and Plains Cree. I'm currently studying and residing and working on the unceded Syilx territory out here. I am a third-year human kinetics student at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, an independent author, and yeah, I wear many hats. I dabble into art a little bit, so yeah, and I'm a mother too.
That's incredible. Can we start, because I think it's so valuable for people to be able to hear about what it means to be from your community. Because I think the problem we're facing right now is we treat all Indigenous communities like they're the same. Like, most people are now understanding there's Indigenous people, but we're still in such the early phases. Can you tell us about your community and what your experience was there?
Yeah, so I'm an enrolled member, and I grew up on the Kisputnik tribe in Louisville, which is one of the 4 reserves in Maskwacis, Alberta, on Treaty 6 territory, central Alberta. So my experience growing up out there, I was raised like about 60-40 with my grandparents and my mom. So I would live with my mom for a little bit, then I would go and I would live with my Gukum and Musum, my grandma and grandpa. For me, when I think about my childhood, I always felt like there was like this glass bubble, over my Gukum and Musum's house, because I always felt so safe and protected there. We lived on like an acreage out in like the countryside of the reserve, and we had a long driveway, we had like a quiet area and everything. So that's why, and it was also a sober household too, my Gukum and Musum. That's why I loved being there so much. And living with my mother too, she lived in like the town site area of Kisputnik, and just some of my experiences growing up on both sides is we never had clean drinking water, and there still isn't clean drinking water in Kisputnik. And it was just one of those things that was just normal to me growing up. Like I never really thought too far into it. There is some gang violence up on the town site area where my mom lived. Partying, gang violence. There is like one experience where someone broke into our house and stole some things when we weren't there, and then another experience when I was pregnant with my daughter, and someone did break into our house, but they didn't get too far because we pushed the door and everything. And when I was pregnant with my daughter, that's when I realized that it's probably not an ideal environment to be raising my daughter in. I don't want to be living in fear like that anymore. So I moved in with my Gukum and Musum when I was 14. And I rode out the rest of my pregnancy there, and then I started raising my daughter there. So I would say that my grandparents, they played a huge role in raising me and giving me good values and just making me feel really protected. They had that safe and sober environment where I was able to grow and my daughter was able to grow. So
that's so beautiful. It sort of reminds me, my mother was a part of the 60 Scoop. Mm-hmm. So she was actually raised in a Caucasian household by a registered nurse who saw the care she was going to need. And I just remember seeing her life circumstance, mm-hmm. and she had what we sold ended up being $1 million home. Yeah. She always had cookies and milk and anything you could kind of want as a kid. But then being at home, money was always a concern. There were other people in our building that were committing crimes and struggling with drug use. And so going to her place like yours, it felt like an escape, and it felt like I want to live this life. This is where I'd like to go. And if I can work towards being in that circumstance over continuing in this circumstance, how did that shape you, knowing that there was one circumstance, crime, and another circumstance, sort of peace, safety, warmth, love? What was that sort of like? Did that develop you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yes, it did. It really, I'm really grateful that my grandparents were sober and everything to give me that environment where I could sleep in peace and not worry about the crime happening around and everything. Sorry. No what was the question again?
I'm just curious as to how that shaped you. Did that like motivate? Because to me, I'm very motivated now. Like I enjoy doing 12-hour days, trying to make an impact on other people, trying to do good, because I see that can pay life dividends, that you can feel warm and loved and valued if you work towards that, rather than the life of crime and living that life. So I see like that motivates me, and seeing what I'd like to work towards motivates me. And it seems like that motivated you as well, to go get an education, try and provide for your family and make sure they feel safe and loved. I'm just interested.
It really, growing up with my my Gukam and my Musum, it really did motivate me to work hard and make sure that I can provide that for my daughter and also my grandchildren too. I always wanted, because they were my safe space growing up, it did shape me into trying to become my daughter's safe space, and my future grandchildren's, my future Chapwan's great-grandchildren's, be their safe space and provide that home. And my Musum is a really hard worker. He's a businessman, and he was running his own busing company and he just retired last year. So that was and he started that when my mom was a baby. So he was always a really hard worker. And my Gukam worked at his busing company until she was in her 60s. So they were really, really hard workers, and they would always wake up first thing in the morning. They always taught me don't sleep in until noon, always keep busy, always do something, don't ever do nothing. Even if you're lost in life and you don't know what to do, have something that you're doing. Don't stay idle and everything. And so my Musum and my Gukam, they did really inspire me to work hard, because that they showed me that hard work gets you those spaces. And so
that's beautiful. Really... Can you tell us where that came from for them? Do you know what made them, because having a clean household where there's not alcohol, there's not parties taking place, that can be challenging when the community around you has such a strong culture. Do you know where that came from for them?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't really know. I feel like I would actually have to sit down and ask them about that. But from my own experience and just the conversations that I had around it, they weren't always sober. They both went to Ermineskin Residential School, and they both have been through some things that they don't really talk about. And I know that they've been through some things is because they never told me about residential school until I was in my late teens. I had to ask about it. That's when I learned about it. So it was never a conversation in our house. We never really talked about that stuff. But I did know that my Muslim did struggle with alcoholism for many, many years, decades. So I know it wasn't easy for him to stay sober and everything. There's been times where he's fallen off the wagon. My Gukam too, I know that she has the most outstanding patience, because she's never had drugs or alcohol in her system. She's always been sober. So she had a lot of patience, a lot of love, and a lot of faith that being there for him, for my Muslim, and for her family, it had a brighter picture at the end, because now they've had a clean household for as long as I've been alive, so 23 years and everything, and now it's just all I've known was peace. Yeah. So yeah. You
also talked about how you were sort of bullied or called names. Can you tell us about how that sort of shaped you?
Yeah, so Maskwacis is surrounded by two small towns in central Alberta. So there's Wetaskiwin and Ponoka. And I went to school in Ponoka. And Ponoka is known for, honestly, I think it was one of the biggest stampedes in Canada. I don't know if it's Calgary has to be bigger than that, but I think it's the second biggest. And Ponoka, they really thrive on that. And it's really right-wing and farmers and really predominantly white town. So I went to a Catholic school there, and that's where I did face some racism. I was always one of the only Native students in the class, and I remember from a very young age, younger than my daughter, and around kindergarten time, that's when I started to really realize that I was different from a lot of my peers, and I kind of stood out a little bit. And so that was my experience. And then growing up, as soon as we got a little bit older, around grade 6, and that's when you really start to see students their other peers around you, how they're being raised, what information their parents are feeding them. And I remember that day so so vividly. It was like during recess, and there was a kid in my class, and he was known as like the farmer boy and everything. And he was I remember he was like taunting me at recess. I don't know why. He just chose that day to taunt me. And he was like walking around calling me like a drunk Indian, calling me a dirty Indian and everything. And, you know, when I would walk away from him, he would like still follow me and like just taunt me and stuff like that. And I remember feeling so, like, for lack of better terms, like feeling ugly in that moment and feeling really like out of place, like I don't belong, like maybe his words are true. And I had another fellow Native classmate that was like with me and like really hearing that too. And we went into the boot room because recess was done, and he was still following me like, oh, like Shayla, like you're a dirty drunk Indian, like dirty Natives, like they don't deserve anything, saying like little things like that. And the guy I was with, he was getting really, really sick of it. So he pushed him into the trash can. He fell right into the trash can. And then after that, I saw that and I was like, okay, I'm staying out of this. And then the next period goes over, it's recess again, and we're all sitting there and we're talking to the teachers. And he's, you know, crying and everything and saying like, oh, like they pushed me into the trash can. I didn't deserve it. And then we're both saying, you know, but he was saying these racist things to us. We didn't know the word racist or anything at that time, but we were saying like, he called us this, he called us that, he made us feel like this, he was bullying us, he wouldn't leave us alone. And I remember at the very end of that conversation, it was us who had to apologize because we pushed him into the trash can, you know? So it was like, so I had to really experience that, how do you say it, like that power imbalance. And from that moment on, that's when I realized that, you know, it's not really fair sometimes. And like, especially in like the town that I grew up in, I started to really see that being Indigenous and everything for other people, like no matter what you do, no matter how good of a person you are, like you can't really shape their beliefs. It's like, it's so instilled in them from their parents. And so, yeah, so that was like one of my very first encounters of experiencing racism in school. And that's something that has stuck with me for years. And for a while, I did feel very, how do you say, like very down about it, because I was thinking at that time, I wasn't really educated on who I was as a Native person. I didn't know about residential schools. I didn't know about the history. I wasn't taught it, not really at home, not really at school. And all I knew was I was one of the only brown kids in my class, and and that's how I was treated because of it. Right. But eventually I came around and I told my Gookum and Muslim, I told them everything that this guy said to me. And I can't remember the exact words that they told me, but I remember from that day forward, my Muslim was telling me, be proud of who you are as a Native person, you know, and then saying that like, basically this is Native land and everything, and it was like stolen, taken over, a little bit of that. And so from that day forward, I was like, I had his words in the back of my mind and everything. And at first I didn't really believe it, like to say like I'm Native and I'm proud of it and everything. I didn't really fully believe it, but I would have to keep saying that, and because it was a matter of survival in those predominantly white, right-wing conservative schools. Right.
What was the harder challenge, being called names, or having, for lack of a better term, the system, the teacher, the person you went to, sort of pick the wrong side, where they, like, you have to apologize, even though A, you didn't push him in, and B, you were the one being bullied. Like, that's a deeper betrayal, where you look at the system and you go, I'm not going to get like a fair shake in this conversation. And so which one stuck with you more? Was it the names, or was it both?
It was a little bit of both, but mostly the power imbalance. How you go to these teachers, these people in power who are they're supposed to protect you, and then they don't. And that's when it made me realize that it's not just my peers and everything. It's people above me. It's my teachers. And then from there, I was actually able to really pick out teachers that would treat me differently and everything. Like, for example, a couple of years after that, I was at the beginning of grade 8, and I was living with my mother, and with my mother and everything, my mother was in a very like she was in a abusive relationship at the time, so there was some domestic violence under my household, and me and my older sister were living there. And I remember this one time we didn't get a lot of sleep that night, and because there was some fighting back and forth between my mother and her then ex-boyfriend. And I remember I was just like feeling a little bit low and everything the next day because I didn't get a lot of sleep that night and I wasn't in a great mood. So I remember we were in math class and I had my head down, and my teacher at the time, he was teaching a math lesson and I had my head down, and he said, he was like, Shayla, is there anything going on in your house that I need to know about? Like perhaps I need to contact social services. And I put my head up and I was like, what? Because I was like tired. I was like, what? And he was like, well, I couldn't help but notice that you and your sister both had your heads down in class today. Is there something going on in the home that you need to tell me about? Because, you know, you're in math class right now and both you and your sister have your head down. And, you know, I feel like if he pulled me aside after class instead of asking me that in front of all of my peers, I would have definitely opened up and been like, yeah, you know what, like there is some things going on and I might need like some extensions for my assignments. But he didn't do that. He resorted to asking me that in front of all of my peers. And I remember I felt like this intense shame, you know? So I remember, you know, experiences like that remind me of the very first time where I wasn't protected by my teachers.
That intention too, it doesn't sound like he was asking the question with the intent of supporting you or improving the situation. It was more just to shame you. It didn't seem like he was there to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was able to see right through that. And from there, I just like, I never really opened up to him about that stuff at all.
Yeah. I really hate that because like, I know teachers get into a mindset of like, they're there to help, they're there to lift others up, and that's good, but like they stress so much about the grade or the class. And the thing I constantly critique, particularly with my partner, is she views herself as not a math person based on a grade 10 math class. Like this is, your dedication is not to that grade 10 math class. You've got peers, you've got other influences going on in your life, you've got a whole other world going on. Maybe you are experiencing abuses at home and challenges at home. So to think that everybody's their best when they're in grade 10 in a classroom is like, it seems like silliness. Yet so many people go, I'm not a math person, I'm not a science person. And it's like, you could be if you were able to like clearly and coherently focus on the topic without pressures and without judgment and without having a grade at the end of the class and saying, okay, well, maybe I just need to improve and like, maybe I just need to focus on this, that, or the other thing. But we put time parameters on, you need to know this by this date. And if you don't, then you're behind. And then there's such shame in that you start to try and hide it rather than going, wow, I should seek out support and help. And I think that when people like yourself choose to seek out support and talk to people and say, hey, this is what happened to me, it creates the space for others to say, maybe I could be a math person, maybe I am not defined by this person or that person. And I think that that's so important that people hear that inspirational message. Where did you go? Because you ended up having a child, I guess, to your own standard, fairly young. What was that? Was that scary at all? Or was that just a next step for you?
It was definitely scary because I was going to the Catholic school at the time when I did get pregnant. So around that time, that's when I like kind of dropped out of that school and I went to an outreach, you know, and I was trying to keep everything really on the down low, keep it really secret because I knew that I was very young. But you know how small towns go and everything. I had one best friend and then that best friend told these people and everything. So eventually by the time that I returned to the public school system where where I wasn't in the outreach doing modules, I was in a classroom setting. Everyone already knew that I was a teen mom. So it was a little bit scary. It really was because it wasn't just being a young mother and going through the changes of pregnancy so young when I don't even know who I am myself, but I was also involved in a relationship that looked a lot like the relationships my mother was in. So, you know, that intergenerational trauma, I wasn't aware of it at the time. I really wasn't. It was normal for me to be involved with people who didn't treat me good. And so there was that factor. It did damage like my self-esteem and my motivation to like get things done, to be in school and everything. It really took a lot out of me to be a young teen mom involved in an abusive relationship and not having a lot of friends, being really isolated from my friends and my family and everything. So there was that factor. I was dealing with a lot more. My mother would say that I have like 10 times more on my plate than other people my age do. And just to like, you know, take it one step at a time and everything. And I did have my family there with me, but there was, I actually spoke at a conference recently talking a little bit about being a teen mom and everything, and really pinpointing that breaking point where I didn't want to go down that path anymore of really being in like the cycle of intergenerational trauma, and really wanting to change it from, you know, being more like my grandparents in the future than like, you know, living in the cycles of trauma. And on that speech, I shared with people that one thing that happened to me when I was 16 was I ended up in a women's shelter in Maskwacis, and it was really one of those things where all these things had to happen to me to put me in that spot, because in that spot, that's where I realized, you know, I never want to be here ever again. I don't belong here. I belong, you know, in a safe environment that's predictable. I belong in a loving home and everything. And that's when I realized that I need to start living for my daughter. I need to heal for her. And at the time, I didn't really know what healing meant. I really didn't know anything about that, but I took the first step of going to therapy. And through therapy, my therapist, my very first one, she gave me a journal. And that's where she's like, "Do you write?" And I was like, "Well, I used to write as a child. I used to make comic books and everything." And she said, "Well, I really strongly encourage you to start writing in this journal." And then that's when I started realizing how therapeutic writing was for me. And going to therapy, you know, reconciling all of my relationships with my family, and raising my daughter in that safe and sober household, and you know, really, really healing my inner wounds and everything, and fostering healthy relationships that got me in like a good, you know, dynamic with my immediate family. And they supported me so much because they knew that in my heart, my daughter was there, and I wanted to do good for her. And with that support, I was able to graduate high school on time.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's amazing.
A lot that happened. The very beginning of being a teen mom, it was a really dark place for me, but I had to get to that rock bottom to learn those lessons that mountaintops could never teach me.
That's incredible. I think that's really well put, and that was going to be my next question. Is it seems like I've met people in my life who are struggling, but they're not at that point yet where they're ready to let go of the vices, let go of what ails them. There's people who struggle with drug use, and they're like, "It's not a problem yet. I've got it managed." And they're justifying it so much to themselves that things are going to be okay. Just another couple of weeks and things will improve. And yet you have to hit a point where, do you have any advice for people who might be in that spot, who might be kind of telling everybody, "I'm going to figure it out. I'm getting my life together. I'm going to start to take those steps. But in a few weeks, I just want things to calm down." And they're always kind of looking towards the future. What kind of clicked in that moment for you, or was that something you were struggling with?
To be honest, I would say the biggest thing for not just that situation, but for any situation at all, if you're in a slump and you feel like you can't get out of it, you don't necessarily have to believe in yourself at first. You just need to take action. And you can like for me, like I didn't know what healing was. All I did was take action and went to therapy. And through there, I started to gain momentum, and then I started to gain a lot of self-awareness. And then through seeing how much I healed, I was able to start really believing in myself. And I can't stress enough how important it is to also have the people close to you believe you and support you too. It's not one of those things where I did completely by myself. I had the love of my mother. I had the love of my grandmother, my sisters, my immediate family. I had their support, and they believed in me, and that was a lot. It made quite the difference having that, because people believed in me before I believed in myself, and my therapist believed in me before I believed in myself. So just take action. And sometimes, you know, you have the courage to take that leap, you know, and then through taking action, that's where you really gain the awareness and the confidence to keep going. And that's when you're like, "Oh, wow, I can do this." And then you start believing in yourself down the road.
There's this great quote that's, "We accept the love we think we deserve." How did you let go of the negative influence and strive towards better? Was part of that motivation, it sounds like, was your daughter? and saying, I don't want this for you, and so I need to go break this cycle. It seems like that's something that people need, is like, it needs to be bigger than yourself. It needs to be something where if it's just about you, then you can go to the casino all weekend long and blow all your money because there's no consequence. But when there's someone else who's going to be impacted by your decisions, then there's like okay, but I have to do it this way. How did that kind of play a role for you?
So that's one of the gifts, I believe, of being a young mother, is that I was still a child myself. So I was able to really see myself in my daughter. You know, I was only 15, 16, and I was able to really remember like big moments in my childhood, especially being like raised in like a household where there was domestic violence. I remember having to grab my younger siblings and put us in a room and keep them company, you know, just to, you know, block out the noise going on. And I remember, you know, having to do things like that. And I just remember like just the feeling, you know, like of like, geez, why can't they just get it together, you know? And feeling, you know, like I wasn't loved in that moment, even though like my mother loved me so much, like, and like, I don't doubt her love, but in that moment as a child, you feel like there's these different priorities, you know? And I remember feeling like unseen and like a little bit unloved and feeling like I had too much on my plate, having to deal with the domestic violence going on in my home. And when I had a child and everything, I was able to like see through Ayla's eyes around when she was 6 months old. That's around the time when I ended up in a women's shelter. And I was able to see, you know, I don't want her to like be hiding under tables and everything, trying to block out the noise of fighting and everything. I remember thinking to myself, I don't want that to be her. That was my childhood, but it doesn't have to be her childhood. So having that, you know, really being aware of my daughter and like how she's being raised, how her experiences are shaping her and everything. So I really stress that like I don't want any fights to be happening in front of my daughter, because I just know how lonely that is as a child. And so that really did help me.
That's incredible. One of the challenges I think people face though is that those people seem to reach out. The people who are worst for you or who have maybe not your best intentions in mind, they seem to try and scrape their way back into your life in one way or another. Was that ever a challenge?
So what, like, sorry, can you like rephrase that? Like, are you like in regards to like my stepfather or
no,
like...
you're the person you were with at the time who's not treating you well. Those people tend to want to kind of re-enter your life and they try and get a foothold back in when they start seeing you succeed or when they start seeing your life go a different direction. Was that ever a challenge?
Yeah, I would say it was like a little bit of a thing, you know, and it had to, through going through to therapy and everything, I had to gain a lot of self-control to know that like, to really pinpoint the manipulation tactics and everything, the cycle, you know, it starts out with love bombing and everything, but don't fall into it, because sooner down the road, they fall back to their old patterns and everything. So it was after the women's shelter situation and having to really like remove myself from there, it was a lot. I had to take a lot of self-control to not fall back into what was familiar to me, because familiar isn't healthy. I had to make up a new familiar for me. And like what you said, like we accept the love that we think we deserve. I had to really go inwards and really think about what I deserve. And for me, it was something that wasn't in my vocabulary. It was almost like I didn't really envision a life outside of my trauma, that I had to really redefine. What is it to be in a healthy relationship? What is it to have this unwavering love for yourself, where when someone tries to step on you, when they try to manipulate you and disrespect you, you have to put your foot down and put up those boundaries. And it was hard. It took years for me to really like know what my boundaries were, and you know, really stand rooted in who I was as a person. And you know, yeah,
I think that's the challenge, because we sympathize with the flawed individuals. We can see like they didn't have good parents, they didn't have a good upbringing, and so we can empathize to a certain extent with their circumstance, and then we don't want to be another person who throws them to the side. But it's about, first you kind of have to take care of yourself and your family before you can look outward and say, I can give that hand up. But when you're just kind of climbing out of hell, it's tough to give that hand up because you're not out yet. It's not like you have that peace and that everything's going to be okay. But you said something before, and I just want to make sure everything connects. You talked about comic books.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about making comic books? Because I think that will likely lead into the journals and then writing and creating books.
Yeah, so as a child, I was always drawing and always writing. My older cousins, they read manga all the time. So that was one of the first books that I read was manga. And I loved it. I just loved like the comic books and like the way they drew their characters. I always thought that like anime drawings were so cute and I just loved them so much. So I would always like try and copy it. And starting really young, I think starting in grade 1, I started making my own little comic books and everything. And I would even make them go like read them right to left and everything, the way manga books were. So I started doing that really young. And then when I was in grade 3 and 4, that's when I started showing my teachers and they would get it laminated. And looking back now, that was 100% a coping mechanism for me to like kind of escape the reality of what I was living in and really dive into this fantasy world and really, thinking, oh, what would my perfect life be and everything. And then just like writing it down in the book. And then that was the start of my writing journey.
That seems like it would be so important for people to do in their lives because we start to lose what our potential might look like. And when you're young, people say like, what do you want to do? And you say doctor, police officer, lawyer, judge, all these great things. But then at a certain point, it's like, be realistic, and all the things that you ever wanted to be seem out of reach. And I think that that's so unfortunate because there's lots of doctors who start at 40. There's lots of lawyers who start at 40. There's lots of people who find their passion later in life, but you get into a rut and you start to think that this is life. And I'm just interested to know how that journaling impacted you, because it sounds like things started to calm down and you were able to say, what do I want for my life? And so what was that kind of rekindling that relationship with like your dream life? What did that look like for you?
So when I started journaling and everything in therapy, it was strictly journaling and just like, the thoughts in my head. And sometimes I would get a little bit creative, but I wouldn't really get too far into it because I didn't really have that passion like I did when I was a child. In that moment, I was just focusing on healing and surviving. And sometimes I would start, when I was around 18, that's when I started to really get back into poetry and really start like researching in my own time, like how do you write poetry and stuff like that. So I remember around 18, that's when I started writing poetry, just like things to keep to myself. And I never really wanted to share it with the world. I honestly never thought I would ever share my writing with the world. But one thing that did happen that going back to what you said about like thinking more realistically is when I was in high school and I was thinking about applying for universities and stuff. I didn't know what I wanted to do at all, but all I knew was that I wanted to get the heck out of central Alberta just because of my history, being a teen mom, being in an abusive relationship. I truly felt like I just needed a change of scenery so I could really figure out who I was as a person. So I remember one day in high school, my academic advisor comes up to me and I'm sitting with my friend and we're talking and we're in the cafeteria and she says like, oh Shayla, like what are you thinking about for university? Are you gonna start applying? Like what are you thinking? We can get started on these applications. And I told her, because I had been single for about 3 years at that time, and I've been consistently in therapy. So I was like really feeling, I'm on the grad list. I can do anything. I never thought that I would be on the grad list, graduating with people that I grew up with. So I was like, I can do anything. I had this like fire in me. So I told her, I said, I don't really know where I want to go for university, but I want to go somewhere far. Like I want to go out of province. I want to go somewhere that offers a study abroad program so I can like travel abroad and like maybe study in Italy for a semester. And I remember saying that to her and she said, well, Shayla, that's not realistic, because you're a teen mom. So let's start thinking like realistically, like Red Deer College. Wow. And I remember in that moment, my friend was like, man, like don't shoot down her dreams. Like, and she was like, I'm not shooting down her dreams. I'm just being more realistic, And I remember in that moment, I had just enough confidence to start thinking of myself in those spaces, but not enough confidence to like get momentum going, to take action, So I listened to her and I, it's crazy, like that fire in me that I worked so hard for, it was so easily like put out by someone who didn't really know me that much. So I listened to her and I went to Red Deer College for a semester and I failed miserably because I just like, I didn't like anything that I was doing. And in the moment I thought, you know, looking back now, I can be like, oh, it's because I was at the wrong university. But in the moment, I thought that I didn't belong in university, period, because I was just like, you know, man, if I'm failing all my classes here, would I be failing my classes in Italy? Like, maybe my academic advisor was right. So I dropped out of school and I joined the military and everything.
What?
And yeah.
Okay.
You didn't know that?
I did not know that. I did not find that in my research. Okay.
Yeah, so I did join the military. I was in the reserves for a little bit. And I did that to, you know, make my Muslim proud, because I do come from a military family. I'm the 4th generation in my family to serve and the first woman in my family to serve. So I was like, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do academics, so I'm just going to try and make my Muslim proud, because I probably didn't make him proud when I got pregnant young. So I just did that. And through the military, I was able to really get that confidence back. And I was like, wow, you know, whatever strong I think I am 10 times stronger than that. And then that's when I was like, you know, why don't I just apply? Like, you know, I don't have my academic advisor behind me telling me what to do. Why don't I just apply to a different university out of province?
So how did that strength come about? Was that through just hard labor of like running and realizing like, oh, I've only ever run like 2 kilometers and now I'm running like 20, or I'm doing things that I never thought I was capable of, and just seeing, so like it was the fitness and the athletics that kind of shaped your opinion of yourself?
100%. And also just the mental part of it too, because in the military, it's not like a civilian workplace where it's like, hey, can you like do some filing, please? It's more like it's yelling, it's swearing. It's their purpose in the military is to break you down, to see how strong you are. So it was a lot of mentalness. It was a lot of mental toughness, you know, having people above me like saying these words to me and everything, and really differentiating myself from them and saying like, you know, I don't have to take what they're saying personally. They're just trying to make me stronger. And, you know, having that like having the words of others and their actions, not taking it personally and using it as fuel to make me stronger. So I remember like we went through a lot in the military. The training is not easy, physically or mentally. So you really figure out your limits and everything. So it had a lot to do with the physical part of it and the mental part of it. That really like grew this confidence in me where I just like, I wanted to see how much farther I can go. Yeah. And I also, even though I was training in the military and learning a lot about myself, there was like this urge that like I needed to get out of like, I needed to get off of the res, and I needed to expand my horizons and see the world out there, because at that moment I didn't even have a passport. I'd never flown like overseas or anything like that. So I just knew that there was more to life. And so I applied at UBCO and I got in, and I moved here with no friends, no family in the province. I didn't know anybody. And then at UBCO, that's where my writing journey really took off. Wow. And it was because that's all I had was just myself and, you know, my ability to write and like really tell a story. And I had one professor, her name is Aisha Ravindran, and she was my English professor in my first year. We had an assignment. It was a literary analysis, and I wrote about being in a Sundance ceremony and preparing for it and everything. And I remember when I was writing, I was like, this is the most creative I've written since I was a child. And I was reading it and I was like, you know, this is actually pretty good. And I was a little shy about handing it in, and you know, I was a little scared of like what she would like think and everything. But she told me that my writing was beautiful, and she said, please keep writing. And then from there, that's all I needed was just one person to tell me that my writing was beautiful, because writing was so vulnerable for me at that moment. I'd never shared it with anyone ever since I was like in grade 2 and writing comics and stuff. So I shared that creative writing for the first time in my life, and in that vulnerable moment she told me how beautiful it was and to keep going, and that's all I needed. And then from there, it's like my writing journey just took off.
That's a huge lesson for people, is that moment where you show someone something, whether it's a video, whether it's a piece of art, whether it's your writing, is that they're entrusting you with their everything, their passion. And I think that that's something we should teach maybe more in school, maybe more at home, is that like when somebody brings you something and says like, look at what I made, that is like one of the most vulnerable moments for a person, because in that moment you're thumbs up or your thumbs down really shapes whether or not they continue or whether they want to continue. I hate doing this, but I have to go back because this military experience is so interesting to me, because we struggle with, we think of exercise merely as like physical fitness, and that's often what we think of. But I don't know if you've heard of people like David Goggins or Jocko Willink. There's this other guy, Tim Kennedy. They're very incredibly athletic people. They run like 240 miles in distance, and they do it all the time to show that they can, for other people to go, maybe I can start running 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, just to prove to other people that great things are possible with your body and that your body will meet you halfway. And I'm just interested, do you have any examples of how that military experience, like facing that adversity and how that shaped you? Because I think we often discount that, the mental toughness that you build when you're running and you're like, I don't think I can go anymore. And then you go another kilometer, another 2 kilometers. Do you have any experiences that you can share about that?
Yeah, so much experiences in the military. I'm forever grateful for my experience there, because I wouldn't be who I am today without it. I think right off the bat, one of the first things is we did outdoor training during the Arctic Gore-Tex, where the Arctic weather, it came down into Alberta, so it was -40. And the one weekend it was -40, we had outdoor military training. So I remember there was people who were, they were getting frostbite on their nose, they were getting hypothermia, and we had to keep drinking hot water and everything. That's the first time I ever just drank hot water. And we had to keep drinking hot water so we wouldn't get hypothermia. And I remember being really scared. And I remember like, are we gonna die out here? This is scary. This is like, everyone's inside and everything. And that's when I was really thinking, I'm like, what am I doing in the military right now? But then surviving that weekend and learning how to navigate outside in -40 weather, that really showed me like, wow, I never thought I was able to really do that. That's something that was just beyond my scope of like what I thought I would ever do in my life. And I did gain a lot of confidence. And another thing is one of my other courses, I actually did face racism on my last course that I went on. And I was told things like, I'm gonna, just talking about how, Indigenous people, they're like the equivalent to Black people in America. That's how Indigenous people are in Canada. I was being told that from like my fire buddies. And in that course, it was the most mentally challenging because we were up for 4 days with no sleep. And when it was time to eat, we only had like 2 minutes to hound down our food, and then we had to get back. It was really tough. And I remember during that time, I was up for about 3 days at that moment, no sleep. And around that time, that's when people like they're not thinking clearly, right? And then at the time, that's when I was being told, all these racist remarks from people. And it's a little scary in that moment too, because we have ammo. We have people who know how to use rifles and everything. And when we're training and everything, we're always thinking that, we're in an actual war. What would we do if we were in an actual battlefield and everything? And to have my fire buddies not like to have that kind of hate towards me because I'm Indigenous. I remember thinking that I was like, I'm scared, like, I don't know, like why, like in the terms of a battlefield, would this person just like let me go, would they like not even save me or anything like that? Would they not look out for me the way I would look out for them? And so that was one of the biggest challenges that I've had in the military, was being like without sleep for 4 days in a row, and then being told these things about like natives and having stuff like that happen. So it was a lot of like mentally challenging stuff, but I got through that course and I came out of it stronger. And then having that experience, it really reminded me of my experience in grade 6 when I was told that like I was a dirty Indian. So it really made me think, in that moment when I was like in the military, I already knew who I was as an Indigenous person. I experienced the ceremonies. I saw like, I heard the teachings from my elders and everything, and I saw how beautiful we are when we come together for ceremonies and celebrations. So it was really not letting him get into my head, So that was one of the biggest
Can you tell us about attending those ceremonies and how that shaped you and what you held on to during that time?
So ceremonies, they're something that's like, they're so like special to me. But one thing that like I will share is when you're in ceremony, you don't have access to your cell phone. You can't go on your cell phone. What you're doing that whole time is you're praying, and through there you're like, you know, I've experienced my prayers being answered afterwards. You know, you go there and you follow the protocol, and then you bond with the people next to you and you pray. And then when you come out of ceremony, you're like, oh wow, like there's a whole other like world out here and everything. And then that's when you start realizing that like so many people are just glued to their phones. And so that's one thing that I'll always appreciate about ceremony, is that it's disconnecting myself from the modern world where everyone is obsessed with like social media and everything. And in that moment, that's when we're really like, we're reconnecting with things that were once illegal for us to practice. And yeah, so it's remembering to remember who we are as Indigenous people.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges we face now, is like we're looking at meditation apps, but they're on your phone. Like we're taking like half measures, half steps towards genuine reconnecting with people. And coming out of COVID, we're seeing people want to reconnect, and they're saying, I don't want to do Zoom anymore. And that's so important for us to connect and put other things away and start to look at each other and like have long conversations about what your life meant and where you're at. Because I think that one of my favorite parts of talking to people for 3 hours is being able to see them reconnect things with themselves and be like, nobody's ever talked to me for 3 hours straight. Like all your conversations are 15 minutes at a coffee shop, then you have to run and do this, then you have to run and do that, where you don't really get to sort through past memories and sort of put them to rest in a healthy way. And I think therapy is a good spot for that. But having your family and friends is where you're going to be able to do that all day, every day. Like you only get to see, like I went to counseling, you only get to see that person once a week, once every 2 weeks, where if you can make that with your family, where you're having nightly conversations about your day, then you can start to go, yeah, that person cut me off and they were rude, but I'm just going to let that go because maybe they were in like, you can start to let those frustrations go. But you see some people and they're just angry at everything all the time. And it's because they have no peace. They have no sense of warmth in their life that allows them to kind of go, yeah, everybody's going to make mistakes, that's okay. And it seems like that's sort of something you're trying to build. Was it tough moving here to BC? Was that like, what was that initial phase like to be here?
So it was quite lonely, to be honest, at first, because I don't have any friends or family out here, so I had to really come out of my comfort zone and start like making connections with people. But over time, I started to realize, you know, I don't have to have my guard up and be like, you know, protect myself the way I did like growing up back in like, you know, being the only Native in a Catholic school and then being the teen mom in the school. You know, I didn't have this wall up anymore. So I just said, you know what, I'm just going to show them who I am, who I truly am. And then people who are meant to be in my life, they will gravitate towards me naturally. And through that, I was really able to see that I'm like worthy of having good friends who are healthy and like supportive. So yeah, it was a really tough transition phase and everything. But yeah, it was... Yeah, quite the transition.
Was the teacher that you mentioned that had such a positive influence by improving your writing, did you keep a connection with her?
Yeah, you know, I did a poetry collection last year I had a poetry class, and for the first time in my life, I made a poetry collection, and she was in my acknowledgements, and it was a little bit hard, like keeping in contact with her a little bit because she's very busy, and she has cancer and everything, so she has a lot of time she needs a lot of time to rest. And so I remember dropping off my poetry collection with her. I sent her the link to my book when it was published, and you know, when I actually started writing again in COVID and everything, writing fiction novels, because I do have a fiction novel right now, and I'm in the final stages of editing it, and I'm really holding on to it because I wanted to go somewhere where it's going to be taken care of really well. When I started writing that, I remember in my head, I was like, well, I have one person that believes in me, and that's Mrs. Ravindran. And I remember like really holding that to me. And when I was writing and everything, I would send her like bits at a time. I'd be like, hey, what do you think about this? You know? And she would just say, like, give me encouragement, like, oh, keep going. I love it. And then last May, when I fully finished the novel and everything, I was like, I need people to look over this and give me their opinion. So I sent her the manuscript. She was one of the first people to read my full manuscript. My partner hasn't even read my manuscript yet. So I really, really trusted her with it. And she took the time out, probably hours out of her life, just to read through it and critique it and give me her constructive criticism and encouragement. So she's still a very important person in my life. And we keep in contact with each other. Every time I have something new, I always send it to her, because she is that one person she's the first person that believed in me.
Wow. And does she recognize that? Does she see the influence that she had?
Yeah, I hope so. I really hope so, because I always tell her how grateful I am for her.
Okay, so you go to university. I'm just interested because your field of study is so far from perhaps your writing.
Yeah.
Was that by design? Are you I want to have different paths in my life? Well, what was that decision? Can you tell people what you're doing for school?
Yeah, so I'm in health and exercise sciences, so human kinetics, and I'm planning to minor in Indigenous studies too. So one of the things is, in my first year of university, I was in this program called the Access program, where you don't have a degree yet, but you're taking all these courses to see what degree you want. And I took a human kinetics course at the intro to it, and that's when I realized, growing up, I was always in sports, and that was really my outlet. That it was an outlet for all of my feelings, and it helped me grow confidence, and it helped me, be strong. And so sports have always been important to me, and after sports, running was important to me. So going to university my first year, I was taking a human kinetics course and an Indigenous studies course at the same time. And that's when I realized I learned about all the benefits of exercise, of having a healthy diet and everything. And at the same time, I was learning about the history of Indigenous people's health, and how prior to colonization, Indigenous people thrived in health in all systems, from spiritually, emotionally, physically, all those systems. We had great diets. We were always in shape. We valued having healthy bodies, and we lived long lives. And through colonization, our hunting rights were taken away, our fishing rights, and then we had to move onto these reservations where we had to get a pass from an Indian agent to leave. And then we relied on these Indian agents because our hunting rights were taken away. And these Indian agents gave us rations of flour and, oils and, saturated fats. And we were just we were introduced to this new, what they call it, the colonization of the body. And, so I was able to see, growing up, my grandparents, they both have type 2 diabetes. And I never always really saw fresh fruit in my house growing up and everything. So I started to realize, I don't want to have diabetes and everything. I want to live a long life. I want to learn about hunting. I want to learn about gathering. I want to decolonize and go back to those ways. So I really took those two classes, and I used that as, something that I would really love to study. And although I am an author and I'm publishing books, on the side, I'm also working on a documentary right now with my partner called Decolonizing Wellness. We got a grant from Tell a Story Hive so we can do this documentary. And I'm taking all these things that I've learned from school about wellness through the Western world and wellness through the Indigenous world and everything, mixing them together as sort of a series where we can talk about how we as Indigenous people today can decolonize our wellness in all aspects. Wow. So I do wear many hats, and I love what I'm studying in school. It brings just a greater sense of purpose, so I can live a healthy life to provide for my children and my grandchildren, so I can, when I have little Chop-On's great grandchildren running around, hopefully I can still be walking with them at least, so I can see them, so I can live a long, healthy life without these diseases that were caused from colonization. And it's not even just physical diseases, it's mental ailments too, depression, low self-esteem, anxiety, all that stuff. It's, colonization plays such a big role in those with Indigenous communities. So that is something that I'm very, very passionate about. And I'm so glad that I have this amazing partner that will work with me on this creative outlet, because I've always been a creative person, So like what you said, I feel like I wear many hats, and there's many different things that you can do. I don't want to put myself in this box and everything. I want to do as many things as I want to do in this lifetime and study everything that I'm passionate about.
Okay, so when did you realize that was possible? Because there's got to be a certain point where you're like, I don't know what my life's going to look like. Things look pretty dreary. Now all the doors are sort of opening. You've got opportunities to make a difference, to change the circumstances of the next generation. Did you see that in the future of like, maybe one day I could be making a documentary, writing books, being a published author, like sharing information and encouraging people to reach their full potential? Was that like the goal, or has this just one door after another and then realizing, wow, I could do all these things?
It was one door after the other. And this is the beautiful thing about moving away for university and like getting yourself out of your comfort zone. And, you know, when I moved here with no family or friends in the province, and that was the best decision I made in my life, because I took these classes that opened up all these doorways for me. And I really saw it. And one of the biggest moments for me is, after my first semester, after I took that first human kinetics class, I had to write a lifetime research assignment. And we had to pick from about like 10 topics about, you know, you have to do extensive research on this topic with health and talk about how that's going to shape why you're studying human kinetics. None of those topics had anything to do with Indigenous people. And we actually didn't learn about like Indigenous health really in that first year. So I was like thinking, you know, I'm taking this intro to human kinetics, and then I'm taking Indigenous studies. And at the same time, I was reading Indian Horse. So I was like reading this fictional story of this man who his hockey was his outlet from residential schools and everything. So I was just really seeing all of the connections. And I was like, you know, I reached out to my prof and I told her my idea. I wanna like do a research assignment that isn't on this list, but it has to do about the like how physical health, physical activity can help heal Indigenous people from trauma today. And she was like, sure, I've never heard anybody do that before, but go ahead. And then through that, I was doing my research and I realized there is not a lot of research on Indigenous health, not up to date at least. They're all really like from the early 2000s. But now within the past few years, I've seen a lot come out. But at that moment in time, it was so hard for me to like find, you know, research articles that were within the past 5 years that could help support my work. So I ended up finding, I reached out to, his name is Dr. Braden Tahiwi. He's Maori, and he has, I believe,
New Zealand.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and he works at the university, and I met him around the same time. And it was a little workshop event. It was called Decolonizing Physical Activity. So I attended that. And he was there, and I reached out to him and I told him, you know, I'm doing this research assignment, but I can't find any research. So he sent me about 3 articles right away of recent research backing up my idea, not my idea, but like my argument that physical activity and nutrition can help heal trauma today for Indigenous people. So I was like, yes. So I wrote my whole paper on that, and then at the very end of it, I got 100% on it.
Wow.
Actually, no, I'm lying. I had 99%, and I got docked 1 mark because it was too long. I went over the word limit because I was so passionate about it. But, you know, having that, my first A+, I was like, wow. And this is something that my prof said she's never seen before. So that was one thing. I'm like, wow, there needs to be more research on Indigenous health. And I need to do my part on the scholar side to make sure that there's more research on it, and, you know, do my best to study it and then use it on my walk of life.
That's incredible, because, yeah, you get so disconnected from your food and you think of McDonald's or Subway, and there's this feeling that you can just eat it and it doesn't mean anything. But we had the pleasure of going over to my partner's dad's place, and he grows almost everything himself.
Really?
And so he's like, oh, like it's tough to grow this life and then have to take parts of it away. Like there's a connection to it. And Rebecca convinced me to start, we go to like local growers rather than going to Save On to get our stuff. And I'm one of those people who's like, I'm pretty against the woo-woo stuff, but when we tried it, it doesn't taste anything like, you take the 2 tomatoes, they don't taste anything alike. One tastes like water and one tastes like a tomato.
Yeah.
And so it's so interesting to be able to start to connect with your food and have a story around it. And for Indigenous people, that would have been how it always was, is that like in Chilliwack, we have a spot called La Chiam, and it's where wild strawberries grow. So you have connections to, oh, we had to go to this spot to go get these strawberries. And like everything comes with a story. And so you have maybe this fruit salad filled with fruits from around your area. And then there's a connection to it. And there's a story with, oh, and then I saw a cougar when I was grabbing these strawberries. And oh, I saw like this beautiful eagle over with like, and you have like a connection when you're eating the food together, where right now it's like nothing is intentional. You have no idea where your cucumbers are from or where your salad's from or what anything you're getting is from. And then there's this sense of disconnect and like, it doesn't matter. What I'm eating doesn't matter. And you get like calorie counts, but they don't mean anything to you personally of like a connection. But when you have like a really good home cooked meal, there's something different about it because the person is like showing you their writing. They're proud of what they've made for you and they put in time and love and care. And there's something, we all acknowledge that like when something's made with love, it's better. But imagine if your food like was grown with love rather than on this giant farm where the farmer's trying to make it at scale. There's no love being put into each and every cherry. And I'm sure some farmers would be like, I do my best. But when you're growing it yourself and when you're cultivating and your hands are in that soil, there's like a different connection. There's a bit of meditation in trying to get at the food. There's so many benefits to reconnecting with the land. And I think we're starting to see people take those steps forward. But it's just funny because when you hear about people wanting to be more natural, this is again where Indigenous people we started from. And so it's just interesting to see like it come sort of full circle where everybody's like non-GMO. I don't want antibiotics. And it's like, hey, we were never doing those things. Like that was never a part of our plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. That you just like, you hit it right on the nail. That is exactly it. And do you believe in like, the energy you put into your food, it really affects like the way it tastes and everything? Because one of the biggest teachings that Indigenous people have is that, when you're making your food and you're preparing it either for your family or for a feast of people, you always put good loving thoughts into it, good prayers, and then it tastes good, and then that energy, people are eating that energy and they can feel it, like that gratitude. And it's so different than when I worked at McDonald's before. I was like stressed out making burgers and stuff. And it's different when you go to McDonald's, you get a quick food and everything. And then you wonder why you're angry after. You wonder why you're irritable. You wonder why you feel so tired and everything. So yeah, it's really, you really hit it on the nail. The energy is
and
real.
You can see it literally. Like when you think of like how Subway squirts on your mayo versus if you're making a sandwich and you're making it for someone you care about, you want to make sure that mayo hits every corner. You don't want to just like slop it on and figure it out. And it's not flavorful. You take the care to do that with each thing. And when you're raising animals and you're trying to make sure if they're stressed out the whole time, I have very little argument now that now you're going to be stressed because their bodies were physiologically stressed. I forget who said it, but they said when like black bears eat garbage, their meat isn't that good, which everybody's like, that sort of makes sense. But if they're living a really low quality life, if they're crushed into a cage, why wouldn't you think that the stress that they're under of not having any room and their mindset is going to impact the quality that they produce in terms of their eggs or in terms of the meat that they produce? And we're at that time where like vegans are like and vegetarians are like, we need to take care of the animals, and that's why I don't eat that. And so like I guess from an Indigenous perspective, all I would respond with was that like it matters more that you show appreciation for it, you say a prayer when you're taking that life, that you demonstrate your gratefulness for that, and that you take responsibility for the life you took and go be a better person afterwards. Treat the person you're dealing with nicer because you just took a life. And so you have like obligations now and like an onus to do better in your community, to think larger. But it's so easy when you're at McDonald's to be like, oh, like who's this cow from? Like, I don't know this cow, so who cares? But when you feel that onus, I think the onus that vegans and vegetarians feel is good. But how I would play it out would be like, I want to show respect by treating others better and owning that I am like a person that eats meat, and now I have an onus on me to do better as a consequence of that, rather than saying I'm not going to eat it at all. It's that I have to help keep like the ecosystems in check, make sure that populations are fair. Like I sat down with Lee Harding, and he's a caribou expert, and he was explaining how like we're just shooting wolves from plains to like keep their populations down. Like there's got to be a better way. And that's where like it's so tragic how we in Western civilization treat animals, treat life, when we know that they're so much more intelligent than I think we ever realize. Because there's this fantastic fungi article, Netflix.
I just watched that like 3 days ago.
Okay, so trees communicate with each other through mycelium. Like what? Like first of all, I'm that person who thought like trees don't think, they don't have feelings. Like I just assume that they're just a tree and I'm a person and I think so. I'm here, tree, But then when you find out that they can help move their baby tree, their tree child somewhere farther away when there's not like sustenance for them, it's like, I just didn't, because you don't have eyes, you don't have a chin, you don't have a face, I assumed you weren't alive. And so to learn those things just blows my mind.
Their animal and plant life is so intelligent, and like, what a Western way to think that like there's nothing smarter than human brains. I actually feel like, you know, something that my partner tells me is that if, you know, animals are so much smarter than us. They know how to survive out there. We're for his Indigenous people, his like the Silk people, he told me that they're taught that humans are pitiful. And you know, there's these stories that come about like, oh, these certain animals, they give up their lives for us because we wouldn't be able to survive without them. And when it comes to the bear, they're not allowed to eat the bears or anything like that, but they can eat the bears under the exception that there is absolutely nothing left. There's no other choice, and then the bear would give up their life for them. But they're just like, their stories like originate back to the fact that, you know, humans were so pitiful. We don't have any fur on us. If we were to like, we can freeze to death just sleeping outside without a blanket on us. And, you know, we wouldn't be able to survive if it wasn't for the animals and the plants and the water and all these other systems that are so much bigger than us. If anything, they sacrifice a big part of themselves so we can survive. And, you know, going back to like what you said about how, you know, we really need to change the way we see and view animals instead of like viewing them, like you say, like vegans and vegetarians, they say like, oh, we need to like, just let them live. We don't eat them. And although that comes from a good intention, Indigenous people have been hunting for years, since not years, centuries, you know, like since time immemorial, you know, and we're always taught that when we hunt for an animal, we do it in a good way. We're not doing it in like where we just take and take and take. No, there's reciprocation in that. You know, there's protocols to follow. For my people, Cree people, we have to like, we put down tobacco. There's like a whole preparation phase for hunting, and we put down tobacco once we get a kill. And once we get a kill, we use every single part of the body. You know, when one of my greatest experiences, just down this road and up those mountains over there, I got my first buck with my partner. And for the first time in my life, I got to witness what it's like to hunt, you know, a buck, and then all the processes that go about it. And, you know, watching him, you know, like gut the animal and everything. And then we grabbed the liver, and not the liver. We grabbed, I forget which part of the animal that we grabbed, but we grabbed as much parts as we could, and we gathered them around, and we put them up, and he gave me a certain body, like an organ, and I put it up on as high as I could on a tree and everything. And there was vultures and crows, you know, going around and everything. And not even a minute after I put on that tree, I got down from the tree and I looked up, it was already taken by a few birds. So we share that stuff. We spread it abundantly, and we try and use every single part of the animal as we can. We don't let that animal's life go to waste. And, you know, there's prayer with that, you know, gratitude. Thank you for giving me your life. And now, because you've so selflessly given me your life, I can, you know, harvest you, you know, in a good way. And then you can feed 10 other families. And, you know, it was just, and even to this day, we're still finding ways. We still have pieces of my buck. You know, my mother-in-law, she's cutting up like sawing off the antlers and using them as buttons and shirts. She's making these ribbon shirts, and she's using them as buttons, and she's giving them, you know, she's making that with love. And then she's giving that, you know, that medicine to other people. And just recently, a couple weeks ago, with my Decolonizing Wellness documentary, we used my buck's hide for the very first time. And, you know, my mother-in-law, she scraped the hide, she prepared it and everything, and we made a drum. And we used that drum, and we gave it to my daughter. So we're still 2 years, almost 3 years later, we're still finding ways to take that gift that was given to us years ago and finding ways to still use it, to still spread it apart and everything. And we, with the meat that we got from the freezers, we gave it away to, I think, about 3 houses down here. And then I gave about half of the buck. I traveled all the way to Alberta, and I gave it to my family. And my Muslim grabbed that, and he dropped it off at elders' houses. At least 10 houses were fed because of that buck. And there's so much gratitude that goes behind it, and so much more meaning of, you know, what it gives you so much more gratitude when it makes you think twice, you know, when you have a plate of food and you have like a steak or ribs, any sort of meat, it really makes you think twice before you eat that. And it makes you think, you know, give thanks.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that is one of the best arguments for hunting in that way, because I think hunters typically, if you go into Vancouver and you say, I hunt, the typical response is be like, how could you? I could never. And it's like, but you're like, there's a responsibility that flows that you don't talk about when people say like, I shot this or I killed that. Is like, you don't have the full context of all the processes that people go through, all the experiences and memories of like, every time you eat a part of the animal, you think like, wow, like, do you remember that day? And like, and then you share another memory. And so it's like, it lives on for, it sounds like years, and you'll never forget the first time you killed that animal. And so it lasts probably the rest of your life. You'll have that connection to that story. And that's far more meaningful than picking something up from Save On Foods that you could ever have. And so I do think that there's like a longing for that sense of responsibility to use things fully, and like a pride that you get to feel when you say we use the buttons and we figured this out and we're looking for new ways, because it's like it's carrying on that animal's legacy. And I think we have that same responsibility to our family members, and I think most people don't remember that. I think most people, if their family served in World War II or the Cold War, World War I, we don't have like that understanding of like what people gave up for us to be here today. And I think that I'd like your thoughts, because a lot of your book focused on elders and their role. Can you tell us about what elders mean to you?
Yeah, so, going back to the beginning of this podcast, you heard that, right?
I
It
did.
sounded like something like people are probably fishing or diving out there, but I heard that. Going back to the fact that my grandparents, they played a huge role in my upbringing, and without them, I wouldn't be who I am today. And it's not just them providing a sober household; it's them giving me access to ceremony and them speaking their language around me. And I don't fully know the Cree language yet, but I can, when they're speaking Cree to each other, I can understand what they're saying. And it's just so much gratitude towards them, even through going through residential school and being taught that you can't practice these things, and being told that you should be ashamed of who you are, yet they still rise above it, and they're in their 70s and they're still speaking their language. They're still practicing their ceremony, and they're passing that on to their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. To me, like elders, there are knowledge keepers. They carry so much life experience, so much knowledge, such a different perspective. Every generation after them has lived such a different perspective of what it means to be an Indigenous person in this modern world. And for elders and everything, they're passing away, they're getting old. And so there's not a lot of them left that have this knowledge. So it's so important for us to connect with them and learn our language and, learn our culture and everything before they're gone. They need to pass on their knowledge. And also, along with like them having such a different way of life and everything, they also have this unwavering love. Yeah. That's what I found. It doesn't matter how much trauma they've experienced in residential school, or if they've like endured alcoholism, addictions, everything that you can name that like colonialism has brought upon Indigenous people. Every time I see an elder today, all I see is love and how much they care for their community.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think that like normal people can learn something from how there's an admiration within Indigenous culture of elders? Because during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw seniors not getting good care. I interviewed Daryl Plekas, and he talked about how the Christy Clark government of the day was very like, we don't need to care about seniors because they're going to die soon. So who cares? So there's this underlying value that seniors don't have a lot to offer. That their job is to retire, go buy a place in Kelowna or something, sit on the beach and die. Like there isn't that feeling that they have knowledge to offer. Do you think that that's something that perhaps, like I feel like when we talk about decolonization, we should put forward good ideas on what they could do better that our culture does that they could learn from. One of them is how we eat, the quality of foods we eat. You can take something from this and maybe start to say, not that we can get rid of McDonald's, but that there's more to be found in eating more naturally. And then the same with elders. That's always one that stands out to me, is like so many of my friends are like, they'll take selfies with their grandparents and be like, oh, like look at this old person. But it's like that person's lived a life, like a crazy life of seeing like at a certain point, Hitler was about to succeed and take over Britain, and we were going to take up World War II from Canada. Like, what a crazy thing to be sitting there being like, oh my gosh, is this going to come right here to like this land? During the Cold War, there was like, what if like hide under a desk for a nuclear bomb to go off? Like these people have like had some pretty crazy times. We should hear about how they overcame. Do you think of like what Canadians can learn from Indigenous culture?
Yeah, so that whole mindset where when our parents or grandparents get too old for us to take care of, we just drop them off at like a nursing home where other people can take care of them. Traditionally Indigenous people, we never believed in that. We took care of our elders just as much as we took care of our babies. They were kind of like viewed under the same amount of respect, and I really do think that's such a colonized way of thinking, is just to throw away your elders as if they didn't just live a lifetime and they have so much knowledge to offer us. I think that it is so important to like take care of your elders and just get as much knowledge as you can from them, because they raised us. So when they get older and everything, we have to take care of them. They change their diapers, So I do strongly believe that it's the colonized way of how we treat our elders. It needs to be fixed, especially if it gets into our Indigenous communities, because our Indigenous elders, they've during the wars, a lot of them have faced enfranchisement because they served in the war, and they didn't benefit from serving in the war because they got their status taken away. They just served in the war because they wanted to protect our land. It's a crazy amount of respect that we owe to our elders, and I don't, from my personal belief, I don't think it's very, very wise to just drop them off at a nursing home. I think when I think of myself as being an elder, I think of myself being surrounded by my grandchildren, being surrounded by so much family, just the way my grandparents are right now. I did learn a lot from seeing the way, like in my family and everything, because my grandparents, they both had diabetes. They both got diabetes when I was like young, probably around my daughter's age, around 7 years old. And I saw the way my whole family had to pick up for them, because they provided a house for them, and all these opportunities. They raised them and everything. So when they got sick, my mom, she every night she would go in, she would cook healthy dinners for them. So it's really that reciprocation of giving back to our elders.
So the other thing, I interviewed Shelley Canning, and she's a registered nurse, but a retired one, and her interest is in ageism and misconceptions around aging, because we always look towards like younger people. And for a lot of the guests that I've had on, they've been like, I don't want to age myself. I don't want to date myself. Oh, this is going to date me if I say that like I saw this in 1988. Now, I'm like not 20 any, like there's this weird feeling people have towards getting older. And I think that that's one of the most like sad things that a person can carry when you hear somebody's like, oh, I'm 44 for the 10th year in a row. It's like, that's so unfortunate that you can't enjoy the journey of your life and the different chapters that you get to enjoy. And it seems like looking to Indigenous culture again offers an opportunity to rethink what it means to get older. That now you have sage advice that people should be coming to you for, that you have wisdom on how to live a meaningful life. You've made mistakes and you can talk about what you've seen and what you've overcome and how you didn't approach it well there, and so you don't have to repeat the same cycle. It seems like there's a bit of shame in getting older for so many people, and a feeling that you need to look 20 forever. Do you have any thoughts on like how we can start to incorporate that change in mindset in regards to it?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm just like recently getting around to like, the inevitable fact that we're gonna age and we're gonna get old. And like when we're young and like in our 20s, we don't think that. We think we're like, I remember this one time I was like sitting next to my gookum and we were talking, and I saw her hands, and her hands were like wrinkly and they were like so aged, but I didn't think of it in like that light where it's like, oh, that's never going to happen to me. In that moment, it was so beautiful because, she has such hardworking hands, and she has like rheumatoid arthritis. She struggled with that for decades, yet she's still gotten so much done, and she's still brought so much valuable stuff to the world just with her hands. And it's just like, I remember thinking that, aging is actually so beautiful. And I think it has a lot to do with social media too, is like we have this fear of like getting wrinkles and this fear of aging, but it's inevitable. And I feel like it's only gonna hinder our love for ourselves if we just keep trying to, be youthful. There's so much beauty in aging. There's so much knowledge behind it. Yeah, I
couldn't agree more. So when you come here, when do you meet your partner along the journey? When do you two connect? What was that kind of process like?
So I met my my partner, I think about a little under a year of living here. Okay. And we just met up, and we played lacrosse together, and we just shot around the lacrosse ball and got some food. And then from there it really started with friendship, and we just connected. And then from there I just never stopped hanging out with him and everything. And then I thought it was so cool that he had rifles and stuff, because I was like, oh, I have military experience, so we would go shooting and everything. And then he took me hunting, and then from there it's just this friendship really just developed into a partnership. And so it was under a year that I had been here, and from there we just we started hanging out and everything, and now we live together just at the head of the lake over here. And I'm just so grateful that I found myself a silk man, because now I have access to his culture and everything. That's really what I was lacking when I was living in Kelowna. I had no access to ceremony out here and everything, and then his family took me in, and now his family is my family, and we go to ceremonies. So it's such a fulfilling partnership that I'm in.
Amazing. Can you tell us about what you've learned from his culture, how they compare? Because as I said, I think most people struggle to understand how unique each culture did. I'm from the Stolo Nation, so we're really into fishing salmon, and the Fraser were people of the river, and we have stories and values around that, and that's completely different than people who live on the island who hunted whales, which mm-hmm. blows my mind. And so Can you tell us about learning about the two different cultures?
Yeah, so I actually wrote a poem about him. I wrote a few poems about him, but he was a little bit of my muse when I started getting really into poetry again. But we come from such different cultures, but they're the same. They have so much, they connect with each other, and they cross over, and we both have the same belief that there's a creator out there. We both have the same belief that animals are so, we respect animals, and we have the same, neither of our people came from invented the sweat lodges, but we adopted the sweat lodges from the Sioux people, I believe it is. And so there's a lot of both of our people, we've done a lot of adopting certain ceremonies and everything. So there is that, but there is some key differences, his language, for example, is there's a lot of there's a lot of different pronunciations that I'm still getting around to, but he can just pronounce it so well, and I'm just struggling so much. But yeah, I did write a poem about us reconnecting with our cultures and learning each other's languages, and that's been a big thing in us in our relationship, is learning each other's languages. It helps us, learn when we're teaching each other it. But yeah, there's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of differences too.
What are some of those differences? Because I think because when you described their belief that humans are less competent than others, I read Stahelis's, they just signed a reconciliation agreement with the provincial government, and in it, one of the first pages is their origin story. And one of them is that basically all the plants and animals in life basically went you guys are incapable. And so we're going to give ourselves to you because you're incapable. Mm-hmm. And that feeling of supporting and connecting, I think, is so cool to see those connections. But do you see any of those differences that sort of stand out to you at all?
Yep. So there's a similarity that we both have tricksters in our cultures. And for Cree, our trickster, I can't say their name right now because it's not wintertime. We can only say their name in the wintertime and tell their stories in the wintertime. So unfortunately, I can't say the name of our trickster. But for his trickster is Coyote. And so they have strikingly similar lessons in their stories, but their stories are different. And the bottom line is that we had these tricksters who basically they walked through so many different paths of life, and we tell stories about it to teach lessons to younger children.
Right.
And for example, they do a lot of how do I say it? So when it comes to grieving people and everything, for my people, we do different protocols where we cut our hair depending on how close they are to us. We cut our hair and everything to grieve. And when it comes to at the end of the funeral, we have a big giveaway of all of their things. We give it away, and then we put our pictures away for a year. And that's just the protocol that we follow to help us grieve. But for them, for my partner's people, they do it a little bit differently, but it's not like they, depending on how close they are, they tie themselves with hide around their neck, their waist, and then their wrists and their ankles and everything. And that's just to like really protect them. And then I'm not sure about cutting hair. I actually don't know if that is a part of their tradition or not, but I know that they don't put their photos away for a year, and when it comes to their loved ones' personal items, they actually burn all of it instead of giving it away. So very key differences, but not to say that one is better than the other, or one is the right way or the wrong way. It's all like there's all just different ways of being and practicing, and then it just comes down to really like he sees the way that my people do things. We do co-ed sweats, and then we're in the sweat lodges we have men and women together. For their sweats, they don't believe in doing sweat lodges because like women are viewed as very powerful. So when it comes to sweat lodges, the men's sweat lodge is exclusive from the women's, and the men's sweat lodge is above the women's, and then the women's would be down closer to the water and everything, because so we don't like, how do you say, not really use the word contaminate them or anything like that, but when it comes to like a stream of water and everything, our power isn't like, like put onto them, like it doesn't cross over or anything. So there's like a lot of differences in the way we practice our ways, but it all comes down to like the same beliefs.
Yeah. Do you feel like because the cutting the hair, it seems like that would be symbolic of like you've lost something, and like showing that you've lost something so people can see it. Is there a different logic to it than I'm aware of?
So a lot of Indigenous people believe that like our hair is like the extension of our spirit. So that's why a lot of like Native people grow their hair long. It grounds you closer to the earth and everything. And when you lose someone who's very important to you, it's almost like you know, it's demonstrating from what I've been told, it's demonstrating how close they were to you, where you don't want to keep going on with life, just like having everything together. You want to bring, like, leave a piece with them, a piece of yourself with them. And then from there you grow, you grow new hair and everything. And it helps with like the grieving process. It
sounds like another thing other people can learn, because we've got a really terrible way of remembering people in like today's society outside of Indigenous culture, which is like you go to the funeral, some person you don't know talks for like 20 minutes about what death means, usually a priest, and then you see the body, you put it in the ground, and you leave, and like that's it. Like there's not like I just lost my grandmother, and like the hard part is like we've had to create something to fill that gap, that feeling of like she's gone, but like her legacy is still here, and it's just who's going to pick it up, who's going to try and find a way to make sure that her memory and everything she worked towards is preserved in like a meaningful way. Because to me, like the way she adopted my mother wouldn't have survived had it not been for her. And so I would have never been born had it not been for her saving her. So like to me, her effects are so vast that it's hard to imagine, like even with your family, like if your grandparents didn't do that for you, perhaps you're not here today, perhaps you don't make a documentary, perhaps you don't make, so like people's effects on you, they can have such a cascading effect. And I don't think that we do a good job of recognizing that in Western culture. And I like that there's processes that stronger cultures have towards remembering and respecting and giving thanks and like understanding that life is like so much more. Because right now, we just talked to somebody the other day, and they were like, I like David Suzuki's take, which is like people are cancer on the planet. And I think that is like the worst mindset you can have towards people, is that we're a cancer on the planet. We absolutely have flaws, and like I'm not here to disagree with that, but we're also here to like harmonize the ecosystem. We're here to make sure that the wolf populations don't outsize other populations, or bears, or like we're here to try and keep the peace amongst all animals, and that if we don't take up that responsibility, the whole ecosystem's worse off. Like humans do play a role, and I think that's something maybe people avoid, but it's something in the grieving process. Like I've seen whole communities like shut down, band office isn't open, nothing's open for the next week because we lost a person and this person mattered. And like when you go to a regular job, they don't like, I lost my aunt, and it's like, who's your aunt? Like that doesn't matter to me. You need to be at work 7 a.m. or you're fired. Like there isn't that like care of like, this was a human being, like they lived a life, and like I want that time to grieve and to figure out how I'm going to rebuild their legacy, whether it's a bench or whether it's doing something to honor their memory. It seems like that's something we sometimes miss.
Yeah, I agree. And it's so like Indigenous people, we do such a great job of really honoring this person's life through having like a 4-day funeral, a 4-day wake, where as soon as we hear that the person has passed away, someone has to start a fire, and nobody can leave that fire. That fire needs to be burning for 4 days straight. We need people to watch it overnight, and we all come together and we make food, and we make that food with love, and then we share these memories and everything. And even after the person has passed on, and like what you said, like here on my partner's reserve, every time someone passes away, like his meetings get canceled because he's on council and everything. So it's really one of those moments where Indigenous people know to like stop and just like stand still when someone leaves this world, because people are grieving and we need to remember them in a way. And another difference between mine and his culture is they have memorial feasts and everything. But for my culture too, we have this belief that every 1 year, 1 human year is 1 day in the spirit world. And our Cree beliefs is that after a person passes away, they go on a 4-day journey in the spirit world to find their way to like the happy hunting ground, to heaven and everything. And so every day they need to eat. So every year on the day, around the day that they passed away, we have a feast, a memorial feast of all their favorite foods, so we can feed them. And then after, we have a spirit plate and everything, and then we put it somewhere where no humans walk, and we leave it there for them. And so that's our way of remembering them. Even years after they pass away, we're remembering to feed them in the spirit world. And not just after those 4 days that it takes for them to find their way to the happy hunting grounds. It's years after that too. Every few years we'll have a memorial feast, or even every year we'll do something to like celebrate them. I've heard of people having hockey tournaments in their name, and like just finding ways to just keep their memory alive. And because one of our beliefs is that spirits get hungry too, so we need to keep feeding them, and we need to keep their memory alive in that way.
Yeah, I actually had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Keith Carlson, who's an expert in Stolo history, and tying it in with his understanding of like what happened with colonization and stuff. And he's a Roman Catholic, and he was able to like, I'm always interested in the parallels. Like I see grace for Christian people as comparable to like saying a prayer or salmon ceremonies to Indigenous people. Like I like those overlaps, because then I think it's less about how we're different. And it seems like the last 100 years have been really about like, well, you don't practice your faith in my way, so we're different. And I don't think that yields a lot of fruit. Like I don't think that that's going to aid in reconciliation, is focusing on how we're different. And he was talking about how, I think it's around Easter time, they burn something and they go through the church and burn it. And that's putting smoke up to the spirits. And then Indigenous people, we feed the fire, and that's feeding like the elders and the spirits above. And so like, I like those parallels, because then it opens the door to realizing we're not so different. And like, I think that the danger is always looking for differences, then we're looking on like fighting and disagreeing and arguing about it's God or it's creator. And it's like, they mean something to both of us, and we can all agree that there's something bigger than ourselves, and that can perhaps bring us together. Can you tell us a little bit more about your partner and lead that maybe into your, I don't know where you want to start. Do you want to start with your manuscript? Because you started that first, your upcoming book. I think you started that first, and your How a Creator Sees You was your pastime.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I actually started writing Mimikwas at the beginning of the pandemic, when the world shut down and everyone was forced to stay home and everything. I started writing my manuscript for Mimikwas, and so when it comes to writing that, I was really just taking you know, a lot of my experiences of like being raised in a home where there was domestic violence and then taking on that intergenerational trauma where I endured domestic violence, and then how I healed from that. And a lot of my healing came from really going back to myself and valuing my health, you know, and redefining what health is for me. So a lot of what's in that manuscript, it was healing for me to write it because it's a lot of my own experiences, but also I want to make it fiction because I also want to, like, you know, mix some other creative ideas in there and like make it a new story, you know. So I wrote that manuscript and I finished it and everything, and my partner has been my greatest like supporter and pillar in my writing journey because he's always believed in me ever since day one. When we started dating, I wasn't finished my manuscript yet. I was about like 3/4 through, and he never read it, and he already believed in me. He was already connecting me with mentors. He connected me with this woman. She wrote In My Own Moccasins, Helen Knott, and Calling My Spirit Back, Elaine Alec. He connected me with those two Indigenous female authors, and I got their emails, I got their like social medias, and I told them, you know, I'm not done this manuscript yet, but like I need some advice from, like, because I didn't know any other people in the Indigenous literature world, but he did. And they just having those people to look up to and mentor me and give me advice, it really like, it just shot me right, you know, like in the right direction. And I finished my manuscript and I had all these people that believed in me. And then going through the editing stages of my manuscript and everything, I really have to remember like the reason why I started writing, the medicine behind it. But it's a little hard when you're critiquing your own work all the time. You're like, oh man, like why did I put that? How do I, you know, you get writer's block and you have to like remember to be creative again. So that's when I was with my partner, and he was like, he's always like, you know, shot so many new ideas with me. When I'm like, I want to do something creative, he'd be like, well, write this, write a story about this. You know, he's really like just throwing ideas out there and really getting my gears rolling. And I was editing my manuscript, and I was starting to feel like a little bit discouraged because I was getting to that part where everything was a little bit too technical for me, and I was thinking about the possibility of me even being an author. I wasn't an author at that point. I was just a student at UBCO that had this manuscript that I couldn't seem to like, you know, really tie the ends together with. And so I told him, I was like, I kind of want to like write a children's book, and then I want to like, but I want to make it different. I want to make it my own. I have yet to really see like an Indigenous children's poetry book, you know, like Dr. Seuss. And I'm sure there might be some out there, but I just never seen it. I've never read it. I've never seen it. So I was like, I want to like kind of make like a Dr. Seuss inspired, you know, children's book for Indigenous people. And so we sat there and we brainstormed and everything. And I was taking a poetry class at the time too. So I was like, so the poetry gears were already rolling. I was like getting really creative in that area. And then after brainstorming and everything, we came up with the idea of writing a poem to really empower Indigenous boys with their braids. And then I took like my experiences of when I was called a dirty Indian in grade 6, and I was like, you know, how did I feel at that time? You know, I felt like, you know, I didn't like my skin. I wish my skin was lighter. I didn't like my hair. I wish my hair was blonde. I wish my eyes were like blue. You know, I wished all these things. I wish that I looked like a white person. And I remember like and I know that I cannot be alone in that. Yeah. So I took that experience and I found a way to like really make it into a big poem, and then using my my gukum, you know, keeping her memory alive because she's getting old, and I know that like she's not going to be here for like, I don't know, I can't guarantee that she's going to be here 20 years from now. I hope that she is, but I can't guarantee that. So what can I do now while she's alive to honor her memory so she knows that she will be remembered, and like she's the inspired character long after she's gone. So really taking those teachings of like honoring your elders, taking the experience that I had of facing racism and really turning it into a story. Indigenous people have always been storytellers, so it's kind of a way of me also decolonizing, you know, storytelling too. Putting it in a paper format so it can be like printed and passed down and in stores and people can buy it. So I really I put so much love into this poem, and you know, it's actually kind of funny because once I perfected the poem, it took me a week max, and I ordered all the illustrations and everything. And like the poem, I loved it so much, and it was about this little boy named Maskwa, and his name is Maskwa means bear in Cree. and it had to do with his braids, and I took in the teachings of like the metaphors of like the bears and stuff, and I mixed it into the poem. And then it came up to the time where my illustrations were almost done. I think there was only like 2 more pages left of illustrations left, and I was done editing it and everything, and I was like just waiting for those illustrations to come in so I can put it all down on paper. And I was scrolling through Facebook this one morning, and I don't usually go on Facebook first thing in the morning, but for this time I did, and I came across this advertisement for this book that was published, and this woman was holding this book in, I think it was like a Barnes and Noble store, and it was so similar to my book, and it was down to the name. His name was Bear, and it was about his braid. And it wasn't a poetry book, but it was the same theme and the same name, and it was about his braid. And I was like, whoa, I just came to this like, the standstill where I was like, I put so much love, I put money into this, and now like, do I still go through with publishing it? Even though like, I don't know how like it works with like getting sued and stuff with like, copying someone's idea or anything like that. Even though I never knew this person, I never even knew that like this book was out there or anything until that moment. And so I was almost like feeling a little bit discouraged. And then my partner told me, he was like, successful people don't just give up, they pivot, they work around it. So just like how can you pivot from this? What can you learn from this? And well, the first lesson was there is no such thing as an original idea. Everything is adopted, everything's adopted and recreated and like made their own. So that was one thing. It was really like, it really brings like your ego down to like a humble level where you realize that there's no such thing as an original idea. And then finding a way to pivot it. Because at that moment, I truly believed that there was, a greater purpose behind this book. Because while I was writing it, I was in too deep. I already saw myself reading to all these little Indigenous children and them looking up to me and, like their eyes beaming and, seeing themselves in me and me seeing themselves in them, that reciprocation. I was already visioning that when I was writing the book. So I was emotionally invested already. So I was like, I can't give up now. I have to pivot. So it took me a little while, but within a month, I had changed my whole poem around, and I changed his name to Kahue. And I brought in the teachings of like eagles who fly the highest in the sky. And, at the very end of it, I like re-edited my illustrations and everything. And once I finally got it all down on paper, I realized that everything happens for a reason, because I loved this version 10 times more than I loved the first version. And I loved the first version with all of my heart. So it was just such an intense amount of love that I put into it. And I was like, everything works out the way that it is supposed to work out. And then I self-published it. And then my partner, he helped me with marketing and everything. And eventually I got to read to a school in the town that I grew up in, not the Catholic school, but the elementary school, Pinoka Elementary School. I read to them twice, once through Zoom and once in person. And both times at the very end of it, they're like saying hi to me, which means thank you in Cree. So it's just like so amazing, like to that community. They're doing so much work with reconciliation, much more work than when I was a child. But to see them have that work with reconciliation where a whole class says hi to me, like thank you in my language, it was just like coming full circle and like having this feeling in your chest. And that's the thing, like every time after I read to children, I read my book to them, I have like this feeling in like my diaphragm, and I couldn't really quite pinpoint it until last month in May, where I was reading to them in person. And at the very end of reading, I had that feeling like in my heart and my diaphragm. And this little boy, he was wearing a purple ribbon shirt, and he had like long hair, like probably up to here. You can tell it's like in that awkward stage where they're growing it out and everything. He had these like big glasses and like these big teeth, and he raised his hand and he was like, my name is Kahue, and your book helped me like love my hair and love my braid. And in that moment, that's when I realized that, that feeling that I was getting after I was reading to them, it's only passion and purpose that can really feel that.
Yeah.
So yeah, my partner, he's been such a big support in all of this.
Would you be able to tell us the story of how the name came about? Because I think that that's a really beautiful connection between you and your partner, and how the name sort of came about for your first book.
Mm-hmm. So I was writing a poem about my partner, and it was on our anniversary, and I was just trying to when you love someone, I feel like love is such a deep feeling that like it's so hard to put it into words. And at the end of my poem, I just asked him, like, you know, do you see yourself the way Creator sees you? And that was just my way of like asking him if he really like knows his worth and like his purpose on this earth and everything, and just how precious he is. And that was at the end of my poem. And then I remember after I wrote that, I was like, that has a good ring to it and everything. So when it came to writing my poem and everything, I was looking at my past poetry and I saw that, and I said, you know, that really, like, that statement, it really stemmed from a pure place of love. So I took it and then I remade it into, like, you know, asking children that. I'm like, how powerful would it be if you asked a child who is still growing, who is still so naive to this world, and someone like an Indigenous person older than them asked them if they saw themselves the way Creator sees them. I feel like that would, you know, I was really thinking, you know, is that something that I needed when I was a child? And that's where I like really ran with it. And it's just like my greatest work has all come from a place of love. Yeah. So
yeah, that meaning, and like it's easy to do something when you feel the meaning and the drive behind it, because as we were talking about before we started recording, there's this, like, people say, I want to write a book, but they have no idea why they would write a book, who they would write it for, and it's like, I just want to check a box. But you've done it with such intent of, like, these things sound like they've come naturally. What was the decision to self-publish? Was this partly like you were proud that it was yours, that it was made by you? What was the kind of decision to self-publish? Because that sounds like far more work than hiring somebody else to do it all for you. But I've also seen people who hire those publishers and they don't get any of the support. And now they've paid a lot of money and like partnered with somebody, and then they don't have somebody on their real team that's trying to get their word out on their book. So what was the decision like?
So there was like a few things that made me self-publish. And number one is that when I was writing my poem and everything, I didn't want anyone to change my words. And although it is good for you to get like outside sources to edit and critique your work, I'm not saying that that's not okay. That's really important in the writing process, is to get like those second opinions. Mm-hmm. But for this one, I held it so close to me that I didn't want, like, after reading the poem and everything, I'm sure people like who do good editing and stuff, they probably like, oh, I would have done it like this and stuff. But for me, for my first book, I really wanted it to be 100% my words and my work. And I wanted it to see just, you know, how far I can go just doing it on my own. And then from there, like taking the lessons and then start like expanding and going through publishing companies and everything. So that was one thing, is I didn't want any of my words to be changed. And another thing too is I had a sense of urgency to publish it. And you know, it goes back to like me like really believing that writing is like a spiritual practice for me, like storytelling, and there's such a greater purpose behind it. When it came to this children's book, I once I started writing, I said, I need to get this out as soon as I can. I can't wait 6 months for a publishing company to get back to me. And I can't, like, I had this vision. I wanted my artwork to be a specific way. And I wanted everything on the book, from the front cover to the back cover to all of the words. I just had this, like, you know, this knowing that it had to be this way and this is the way it was supposed to work out. So I watched a quick YouTube video on self-publishing and I was like, that's actually quite easy. And Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing actually does a great job with like giving you all the resources and the outlines for like templates and stuff like that. So it's fairly easy to self-publish once you put in like all the work and everything. So yeah, but it really got back to like me like having that sense of urgency to get this out in the world. And I feel like everything happened the way that it was supposed to happen. Like getting pivoted to go in a different direction, and like the publishing date, it was like divine timing. Yeah.
Was there like a sense of pride as well once you hit that self-publish button? Like once you hit that point that this is all you, there's no people behind the scenes trying to pull strings or anything, that this is authentically your first step into the publishing world?
When I first published it, I didn't like really quite believe in myself. I was like, hey, it's out there, and I posted it, and I was like, if anyone wants to buy it, you know, it's right there. And then next thing you know, people were buying it, and next thing you know, I was getting interviews interviewed by these media outlets, and then I was like, people were reaching out to me, and they were reading my book far before I even got the book in my hand. People had already had their copies, and they were telling me how much they loved it. People were telling me they cried when they read it. And in that moment, I was like, still didn't quite believe in myself, but other people believed in me. So I was like, I took that action. Momentum was coming. People were believing me. And then I held the book in my hand. And then I would say that it wasn't until I held the book in my hand and I read it and I realized what I just created that I really felt that sense of pride. Yeah. And then speaking to these media outlets and everything, I had just a little bit of imposter syndrome because it was my first book and I published it all by myself. But over time, like getting these opportunities and everything, it's really grown my confidence to really be proud with what I've created.
Yeah, what has that been like? Because maybe you see yourself as like the components to doing what you're doing, there's so many more than maybe you realize in the get-go of like having to do media interviews and having articles written about you and being savvy on social media. What has that, like the book is done and that's maybe your comfort zone, but now there's interviews and there's talks about it and there's getting the name out and stuff like that. What has that journey been like?
So it's been a lot to work with, to be honest, because in my heart, I'm still like this little girl that grew up in like Kisputnik tribe and like, was a teen mom. I endured like domestic violence and everything. So there still was this like belief that like, what am I doing? Who do you think you are? Like, that's what the imposter syndrome is. But, I had this opportunity to speak at the Can Do conference as a national youth panelist. And when I was first like accepted into the panel and everything and like seeing everybody else's stories, I was like, wow, like I don't really like, thinking I don't measure up and everything. But my partner really helped me, like really was like, what, don't think that way. Like, what the heck, you're an author and everything, It was really learning how to accept like the good things that came with like accomplishing this and really like accepting people, saying, congratulations, you're a good writer. And then like really accepting that and believing it. It took some practice at first, but over time, after like telling my story over and over again, it's like repetition and everything, and it's really like making me realize that I have come a long way. And as important as it is to be humble and to keep striving for higher goals and everything, it is also just as important to be in the present, in the moment, and think, wow, I was that little girl who faced racism and like didn't really love myself. I was that teen mom who like ended up in like a women's shelter and everything, and now I'm here right now and I have this thing that people are proud of, and it's opening so many gates for me and really saying, look what happens when you open your heart and you really water your passions. Yeah. And it's just retelling my story. It's really helped me, realize how far I've come.
Yeah, and being able to tie that not just back to like your own success, but being able to know that it's having like a positive impact on those individuals in the schools that you're presenting at. And I think you went to the West Edmonton Mall and did work there. Could you tell us about like the impact you've seen on young people and that inspiration?
Yeah, so I had some people come out to my signing that were from my community, and it's just like it's really amazing to read to these little Indigenous kids and seeing myself in them seeing themselves in me and everything, and then them also realizing that I am from Maskwacis too. I am from the same reserve as you. I think it is important to have those people who come from the same place as you and seeing them reach these heights and everything. I think it's so important to see the role that I play, and it really keeps me in check with like walking a good path in this life. But yeah, it is really like, it's very humbling, very amazing.
What was the response what you expected? Was it surpassed any expectations?
Surpassed. Yeah. 100% surpassed. I wasn't even really like expecting to like have like media coverage on it, just because it is my first book and everything. And I was like, well, I probably have to market myself and like sell like 200 books before like I get media attention. But I probably only sold like 100 books before I like got media attention and everything. It was just like, I wasn't expecting it all to come so fast. Yeah. It was very fast, almost like a little bit too fast, where I was like talking to my partner Ryan. I was like, this is happening too quick. I don't know if I'm like ready for this. I don't know if I believe that I can really do this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What was that sort of journey like to start to adapt? Because I think that's the inspirational part of like nobody envisions themselves reaching those kind of heights. But like you kind of have to ride the wave and take advantage of the opportunity. But there is sort of that like, let's put the brakes on, let's slow this down a little bit because people are knocking. So what was that kind of journey like?
It's going back to, you know, you don't have to fully believe in yourself at first. You just have to take action, and through action you gain momentum. Other people start believing you, and then you can fully believe in yourself.
Is there anything that you haven't liked about this, like that's been a challenge or adversity that you faced publishing your first book? The only thing I can think of is maybe being on social media to get the word out. Everybody says stay off of social media, but even with the podcast, you can't stay off social media in order to get the word out.
Yeah, so actually back in March when me and my partner, we started our Decolonizing Wellness documentary, on one of the episodes we did a dopamine detox where we stayed off of social media. We didn't eat fast food, we didn't watch TV, we didn't listen to like music and stuff like that. It was like a full-on like extreme dopamine detox where we were just forced to just be, you know, really all we could do was meditate without like the mindfulness, like meditation music and stuff like that. Be out in nature. We had to find ways to keep ourselves busy, and then through that dopamine detox, I realized just how amazing I feel without social media. And that was 3 or 4 months after I published this. So then it started to become a little challenging with marketing, and I was like, well, you know, I really want to like, a big part of me wants to like delete everything and not go on social media ever again. But then social media is such a tool that you can use for all of these things. So it's like, it was a challenge having to find the positives in social media, how I can use it as a tool, how it can bring me opportunities, but also having the the restriction to limit myself from falling back into being on social media too much where it starts to become toxic for me. So the way I view social media now is it's almost like a job. Yeah. And sometimes it's not like, sometimes I don't like it too much having to like post and everything, because there's that fear that, oh, I'm gonna fall back into the social media rat race and everything, or like the hedonic treadmill and everything, and then, you know, feeling so burnt out after scrolling on Instagram for like an hour, and then like having these thoughts like I'm comparing myself to other people. But it's like, it's having to learn how to use social media as a tool to market. It's a challenge that I'm still learning how to master today.
Yeah, the only advice I can give is my partner and I have gotten very good at scheduling the posts. So like every day, I think 2 posts go up. I have no idea when, I don't pay attention to it, but like Facebook does give the option to like schedule all your posts.
Oh, really?
And so now, and you can do up to, I think 3 or 4 months of scheduled posts. And so obviously with some things you can't plan ahead and schedule it because maybe there's an interview dropping that you didn't get to choose when it releases. But for the most part, like I'll take the podcast, turn it into clips, schedule all the clips on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and they just go up when they go up, and I don't have to connect with that, because that was a trap I was falling into. Is I talk so much smack about social media, and then I'm on there trying to get the word out and being like, gotta like it, gotta like get the comments out, and it's like, if you can just schedule it, then you have like less of a connect. And maybe it doesn't do as well if you're sitting there like trying to get the word out, but at the end of the day, they're gonna like it or they're not. But that's the only kind of trick I found, is kind of disconnecting myself with when it's going live, because then there's like that, like, how's it doing now, every 5 minutes, but when you don't know when it's releasing, there's like kind of like people will be like, oh, you just posted, and I'm like, I'm just sitting here talking to you, so yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that you can schedule your posts. I'm gonna have to ask about that after this podcast, how you guys do that, because that would help me a lot with marketing and everything. Because for me, I find it like troubling when I log on Facebook or Instagram. I'm like, okay, I gotta make this post, and then like while I'm writing it, I'm like, I'll come back to this later, and like scroll and everything like that. But yeah, that's a very handy tool, actually.
Absolutely. So I'm interested to know, when does your other book come out? What is your plan in regards to that?
So I have, if everything goes according to plan, I should be done editing it by the end of this month, because I follow like the schedule where I crunch and everything. I do a little bit at a time, 1 chapter a day, 2 chapters a day, and then going through it. And then like once I'm done this round of edits, I wanna not publish it. I wanna submit it to a publishing company, because I want them to do the hard work for me this time, because this one was like a lot of lessons came up with self-publishing this one and marketing for myself. So I wanted to go to a publishing company, and there is one specific publishing company that I have had my eye out since I was like still in the first phase of writing this book.
Wow.
And I really I've been manifesting it since day one that they pick up my book. And thank God they have a little thing where they accept manuscripts from Indigenous people without going through a process. They just it's just a button. They usually go through a process with other books, manuscripts and everything, where you have to go through these stages and everything before you can submit it. But for Indigenous people, you can just submit your manuscript directly to them.
Wow.
And then they'll get back to you within a few months. So I really want to put my book there because
tell us about the publisher so we can get the word out.
They published Indian Horse.
Okay.
So by Richard Wagamese, and I believe they published Medicine Walk by Richard Wagamese. A lot of Wagamese's work, which by the way, just a quick tribute to Richard Wagamese. Yeah. He's inspired me so much in my writing journey. And rest in peace, he actually lived just in Kamloops over here.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, so he's inspired me so much in my writing, and I just wanted to he was the trailblazer for me, and he paved that path. So I feel reading Indian Horse, it really that was the book I read around the time that I started writing again, fiction terms and everything. And so I just really want to follow his footsteps and everything, because he really blazed that trail for me. So it's the same publishing company, Random Penguin House. They published Indian Horse, and I'm planning on submitting my book there. But I have also applied for this Audible Indigenous Writers Circle. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
So Amazon, Audible and everything, they have this program for Indigenous writers, and they have these authors mentor Indigenous writers, and I applied for it, and I should know by the end of this month if I got accepted into it or not. And they have Richard Van Camp, who is he's gonna be one of the mentors in this, and he's gonna so if I get accepted and everything, I would love to be mentored by authors like him, and really see what their opinion is, and see where they can critique my work, where they can see if they can make my manuscript 10 times better than it is. Yeah. So I do have that. It's in the air right now. I don't know if I'm gonna get accepted into it or not, but if I get accepted into it, then I'm gonna hold on to my manuscript a little bit more, and that's gonna be my goal in the Indigenous Writers Circle, is to work on it, to use that as my main piece, and then get this advice from all these different Indigenous authors, mentoring me and helping me, bringing it into a masterpiece. So we'll see where it goes.
What is this one about? How would it compare in terms of writing style? Because it's quite a bit longer, I'm guessing. It's
a fiction novel. Yeah. So I tried to make it about 50,000 words, which is the average length of a fiction novel. But it is about this girl named Mimikwas, which means butterfly in Cree, and she heals from intergenerational trauma from running and really valuing her physical activity. So wow. It's there's without spoiling too much, there is a lot of it's kind of how do you say it? There is intergenerational trauma in there. There is sensitive topics in there, but it also shows her journey of how she overcomes every single one through healing. Yeah,
that is the message I think that we're working on right now, because I know a lot of people who just are now learning about residential schools and what's gone on, and they want to help. But from their perspective, it's how do I get involved in reconciliation? How do I make a positive difference? And my perspective has been consistently, grab your book. I don't know if you've heard of Stand Like a Cedar, but that's a Stolo-based book with Carrie Lynn Victor and Nicola Campbell, who wrote about standing strong. And we have a story about our cedar tree, that a generous man was turned into a cedar tree, and that it gives back to the community. And so you wanna live your life and be strong and stand like a cedar. And so to look at people like that, I don't know if you've heard of Raven Reed. But Nicole McLaren, I think I have her name right, she's created these subscription boxes so you can hear from Indigenous authors like yourself. You can get interesting decor and stuff from her subscription boxes, and I think the powwow box is available now, which they were just talking about, but that there are avenues to connect with the culture in a beautiful way, because I think that's the hard part, is if you just learn about I come from a criminology background, so I learned a lot about our overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, our low education rates, all these terrible statistics that make it really dreary if those are your 4 facts on Indigenous people. It makes it seem like we're really not on the right track. But then there's people like yourself inspiring a different message, which is, Indian residential schools, the 60 scoop, colonization, these were horrible atrocities and really taint Canada in a negative way and have made Canada look horrible on the global stage. But the beautiful story is how strong the people who attended were, how strong their children are, how strong their grandchildren are, and how we're not down and out. We're not done. This isn't the end. We're going to turn this around. We're going to bring back, and we're going to fix, seems like, a lot of like Canada's problems when it comes to energy, when it comes to taking care of the environment, when it comes to these things. We are the trendsetters that I think others will eventually follow. And so I think that that's hopefully the message people think of when they think of Indigenous people now, not that we're down and out, that we're on the rise, and look at us turn all of this around because we are so resilient, because we are so strong.
Yeah, there's a couple quotes that I've seen before. The first one is, as much as we carry like our ancestors' pain, we also carry their resilience and their strength and their love and their ability to laugh during hard times. And another one is, as much as we teach people about, you know, the horrible traumas that Indigenous people have endured, we should also be putting light on the successes and like, you know, what we're doing today to like really heal from that stuff. We need as much Indigenous success stories as we do, you know, really shedding light on all the terrible things that are happening. There needs to be a balance, at least.
Absolutely. So for the documentary, when is that hoping to release, or what is the plans in regards to that?
Okay, so I do not know the exact date, but I know it's either I'm going to say mid-July to be safe.
Oh, so it's coming up really soon?
Really soon,
wow.
Yeah. The first few episodes, we've finished 4 episodes so far, and those ones are going to start being scheduled to be aired in July. And you can access it through TELUS Optic. And so those will start in mid-July, and then we have 10 episodes, and they're just going to be carrying out after July. I think they'll all be aired by September, I believe. But
is there going to be accessible on YouTube or anything? Like, how are people going to get it if they don't have TELUS?
So we're my partner knows more about that stuff, but right now I'm going to say that yes, you can access it on YouTube, because at the very end of each of our episodes, we were doing a little podcast with each other, and those are going to be aired on our YouTube. But like, you know, I believe that like you can still access it. You can still watch it without TELUS Optic. Like there will be a link for people to watch it on the website.
Right. That's going to be amazing. How many episodes, and how is that sort of set up?
So we have 10 episodes, and each one is about 10 to 20 minutes long. I believe the longest one is around like the 25-minute mark.
Right.
So yeah.
And so they each touch, how many episodes did you say? 10. 10. Okay. So, and it's going to cover a different topic each one?
Yep. They're all going to they're going to cover different topics. So we try to we had so many different, we actually have a model and everything. And we're talking about nutrition. We're talking about like physical activity. We're talking about like arts and like creativeness. We're talking about, you know, our spirituality, kinship. There is, you know, like our connection with like, you know, animals and plants and stuff. And yeah, I believe right off the top of my head, I believe that is our web and everything. We are going to be showing the web on like the intro video, but so we're covering a bunch of different topics about wellness, but they all overlap with each other. They all like play a big part in like balancing each other out. So you'll see like a lot of things crossing over throughout the whole thing.
Right. And so was like videographers brought in, or how did you guys set all of this up?
My partner is actually a videographer and a photographer. He's an amazing one. He's been doing freelance work since I believe 2018. Wow. I don't know. It was like, but he's been doing freelance for years, and so he has like a lot of years under his belt with photography and videography. So he was doing that for like different companies out here before that, and then so we didn't have to really, thank God, hire any videographers. And like it's only been me and my partner really organizing everything. I'm the script writer and everything, and we both have our brains together, so I'm writing everything down and he's shooting everything, and he's also teaching me how to like use the gimbal and stuff. And so yeah, it's all creatively me and him, just like, you know, you do this and I do that, and then like we're teaching each other things, and like we're just working together as partners.
That's got to be so cool to be able to like work together and not have to have a meeting in a boardroom and other people have like a different vision, that you guys are able to just collaborate all day long.
Yeah, it's great us being able to really like be as creative as possible, and because me and him, we have like so much similarities in how we are creative and everything, and when we're not, where we don't have similarities, we're like, you know, really supporting each other in that way. So it's it's really been great to see what happens when two highly creative people can come together and then just create this together.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell people what maybe, because this will be airing shortly into National Indigenous Peoples Day, can you tell people what reconciliation means to you?
Yeah, Rebecca actually asked me this earlier today when you were setting up, and I told her, right off the top of my head, reconciliation is creating these safe spaces for Indigenous people to creatively express themselves freely, and just making those spaces. Like, how Random Penguin House has an option where Indigenous writers can just submit directly to them instead of going through all of these things. It's really recognizing, the extra challenges that Indigenous peoples face, and, making much more things accessible, much more resources for them so they can, get that helping hand up in succeeding in this world.
Amazing. What do you hope people take away from your story? What do you hope, perhaps there's a young person, they're struggling in school or something, what do you hope they take away from your story?
Wow. I think that really viewing, every idea that you have, viewing it as a gift from the creator, because it's to get to where I am today. I've had this belief that this is my purpose in life, that it's bigger than me. You're going to impact so many different people on this walk of life. So it's really, seeing those gifts, seeing those ideas in your head, and you might think, oh, they're a little bit silly, but when you start seeing them as gifts from the creator, given to you because you are capable of bringing them to life and impacting people, it totally changes the narrative, and it shifts it from, oh, maybe I can do this one day, to I have to do this, I have to impact these people. It was given to me from the creator so I can bring it to life, and share that medicine. And there is this I was listening to motivational videos this one day, and I believe his name is Denzel Washington. I don't know his name.
Denzel Washington.
Yeah,
he's a famous Black actor.
Yeah, and he's has motivational videos and stuff. Okay, so he had this exercise, and it completely just changed the narrative for me. It's you close your eyes and you think of imagine you're on your deathbed and you're about to die, and around you are all of these ideas that you had, all these ideas of business ideas, and anything really. And they were given to you because you were supposed to bring them to life, all these goals and dreams and aspirations, but you didn't bring them to life because you were too scared to fail. And now they're going to the grave with you, and they're so they're looking down on you, and they're disappointed. It's you were supposed to bring me to life, and so I can change all these people's lives, but you were too afraid. You couldn't overcome your fear, so now I'm dying with you. And it's a little harsh to think about it, but it really goes hand in hand with me really viewing those gifts, those ideas as gifts from the creator.
Yeah. That's incredible, because as I said, I listened to David Goggins, and he wrote a book. I think it's Won't Break. I'm going to mess up the name. Yeah, no. But he wrote a book about how he was abused as a child by his dad, not really loved by his mother. He was super overweight. He wanted to become a Navy SEAL. He faced a bunch of adversity, and as I said, now he runs 500-mile races. But one of his kind of anecdotes was that he goes up to the pearly gates, and there's a guy there, and he's saying what you were supposed to do in your life in order to get into heaven. And his dream was to get there and have them say, you were supposed to do that. Yeah, you did that. Yeah, you did that. Oh, we didn't expect you to do this. Oh, you weren't supposed to run 240 miles. Oh, we didn't expect you to do this. And to have that whatever list of the end of your life to surpass whatever anybody's expectations were for you, that you could do that's conceivable, that you could surpass even what anyone expects of you, and that would be a really good thing to see how far you could push yourself. Just like when you're facing adversity and you're out in the cold and -40, and you're I never thought I could do this, but you do these things and you go wow, I'm capable of more than I ever anticipated. And I think that's such a motivational message to leave for people. Can you tell people how they can get your book, how they'll be able to, I know you just said it, but how people can get access to the documentary, and how they can connect with you on social media?
Yeah. So to get The Way Creator Sees You, you can access it on Amazon. You search up The Way Creator Sees You. You can order it on there. It is also available in a few select Indigo stores right now in Kelowna, Vernon, Edmonton, and Winnipeg. But this is like kind of like my little announcement, is in the works right now. I'm working with a guy at Indigo on getting my book on a Canada-wide distribution, so it can be in every single Indigo store in Canada. So it's in the works right now. We're trying to tick all the boxes. So I am hoping that we can get it in every single Indigo, so it's more accessible for people. But as of now, it is available on Amazon. And my social media, I'm mostly active on Instagram, so it's Shayla.Raine. And I do have a Facebook author page that I like to update after every single reading that I do, things that I'm up to. So yeah, that's how to access me. And if you also purchase my book, I do have a work email on here that I use.
Awesome. Well, Shayla, I'm so grateful that we were able to sit down. Can you tell people where we are right now?
Yeah, so we're on the Okanagan Indian Band, which is unceded Syilx territory, and we are right beside the north end of the Okanagan Lake, and we are also beside us. This is technically Kamasket Beach, and beside us is the Powwow Arbor. And yeah, we're just overlooking this beautiful lake right now. I'm actually really glad that that you agreed to come to the spot, because once you told me that you were coming, you guys were going to do an outdoor podcast, I was like, I know 2 amazing spots, but I'm glad that we got this one.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. It's been beautiful to have the birds in the background. I really appreciate you sharing the journey that it took to become an author, your courage to make decisions that were maybe intimidating at the time, because I think that our community, anybody who reads your book, anybody who hears this, is lucky that you made those decisions, because it makes an impact, and it makes people think, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can learn from somebody else's story and grow as a consequence. And I think we're so lucky when people like yourself are willing to do that. So I truly appreciate you being willing to take the time to come out here on this beautiful day and share your story.
And thank you so much for coming out here. I'm sure it was like an anxiety-filled journey just to get here and everything, all the bumps and that we've hit on the road. I'm glad that we were finally able to come here and sit down and talk. And although we weren't able to do the full time that we wanted, I believe it's quality over quantity too. Absolutely. And I'm really glad that I'm really thankful that you guys were able to make it out here.
Absolutely. And if we can support you in any way, your documentary, share the word, get the message out. Hopefully there will be future episodes of this where we talk about your new book and what's going on there, because I think that we need more voices like yours. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we just did, 2.5 hours, something like that.
Oh, that's awesome.